Okay, so today we're working on a 2011 Dodge Ram 2500 with the Cummins 6.7 diesel, and we found earlier that the center driveline carrier bearing has a lot of slop in it. The rubber piece has disintegrated, and we'll splice that in a piece of video here in a second. I think this looks bad. Stop. So we're going to work on this thing today. I've looked around YouTube for some other how-tos for this vintage of vehicle and not really found any specific directions, so we thought we'd make one. First thing you're going to need is a 15mm socket, probably an impact gun or a 1/2-inch drive with extension and cheater bar to take the 4 bolts out of the rear drive shaft where it connects onto the pinion of the differential, which I'll show you here in a second. You can use an impact gun with a long extension because the angle of the drive shaft lets you get up in there and remove those 4 bolts. The easiest way I think to do this is to remove the rear axle, slide it off of the spline at the center to remove the axle there. So what we've already done is removed the rear drive shaft. You can see the 4 bolts on the rear diff. You can see the drive shaft laying down there, and we've had to remove the boot, and then there's the outside of the spline that goes in right there. You can also see that I've taken chalk and I've marked and indexed the drive shaft the way it goes onto the diff here. I don't know if you can see that mark up on the other side there or not. Yeah, there it is right there. And we've marked the drive shaft back there, and we've marked the drive shaft here, and we've also marked it here so that we can put it all back together to maintain the balance. You can see the center axle, if I can get far enough away, the center axle or center driveline piece here that we're going to be replacing because of all the play and wear in that. This truck's got about 130,000 miles on it. I wouldn't have expected that to fail at this point in time, but it certainly has. So Dodge has made this reasonably easy because the 15mm socket that you use to take the axle off the back is the same socket you're going to use to take the center axle or center driveline carrier bearing mount down. We also need to pay attention to this little thing right here. This piece is something that comes in the kit that the boot wraps around to the dust boot and the grease boot to keep everything clean and pretty, so we need to make sure we know how it goes in. And we also need to know, if you look and see here, this rubber donut is facing to the forward of the truck, which may or may not be important as we go to put this thing back together here shortly. Okay, as you can also see, we've put a jack stand underneath the front drive shaft here, because when we remove that carrier bearing mount, that thing is not super heavy, but it's going to be heavy enough, and I'm working by myself, that I really don't want to have to catch it or drop it on me. We've also found that these 15mm bolts there that hold that carrier bearing in place are super tight. Maybe it has something to do with the rust. It's taken our 1/2-inch impact wrench with a boatload of air, quite a process to get those out of there. I believe the nut up under there is captive or welded into that bracket. It doesn't seem to require a wrench on top of that. Just plenty of air, maybe some penetrating fluid yesterday would have been a good idea. Now you can see we got the mount down out of there, and what's left on the shaft is the rubber piece and the bearing that we've got to lower that down, and we've got to pull that bearing off of there and install the new one. And chalk lined our front axle, as you can see, clear up to the tail shaft of the transmission, because I believe that we can slip that right out of the tail shaft of the transmission now and use the vise to actually work on pulling the bearing out without being under the truck. So here it is out from under the truck. This is the piece we got to work on right here. Take that out of there. This is what it looks like after you slip the tail shaft out of the back side of the transfer case. I guess this is a 4-wheel drive, so it's really not specifically the transmission, it's the transfer case. that it comes out of. And you can see we marked it up there so that we know exactly how to put it back in. So next what you're going to need is you're going to need a big puller. This is a 2-jaw OTC puller. I think I got it on Amazon for about 60 bucks. But what you have to be able to get this job done is you need a puller that's at least got about an 8-inch throat to be able to reach clear back here and grab that bearing while you're pulling against the end of the shaft right there. So we'll get that set up and get this rubber cut off of here so we can get down to the bearing and see where we go from there. Okay, so we were able to peel this rubber off. All I did was slice it up with an X-Acto knife, or not an X-Acto knife, but a utility knife, and cut it a couple times with a pair of heavy-duty side cutters. And as you can well see, we were able to get that thing right off of there. The bearing doesn't appear to be in that bad a shape. No real play or anything in it. It's not terribly noisy or anything like that, but it certainly has spun out of the rubber, so that's what we're aiming to fix. And here's that collar piece that has to be installed correctly. Here's the new one here. I assume it goes like that when we put it back on the shaft there for the cover to clamp against. Okay, you can see we fit our puller on there. We're just going to try to pull with that shield and stuff on there and see if we can just get it all out of there as one unit rather than having to try to take that tin off of there and that tin off of there and see what happens. We'll just go easy. Okay, so we weren't having very good luck with the puller on that tin piece, so I took a grinder with a cutoff wheel here and I made a slice, being very careful not to hit into the axle or anything like that there. Then I was able to take a long screwdriver and just tap this piece off here once I got the angle on it. So as you can see, it came right off with no problem. Now we're going to finish trying to get this tin piece off of the bearing so that we can put the puller directly onto the bearing race there, and I think we'll have a lot better luck. The other reason was just to make sure that there's no clip ring or anything like that on there that would be causing us difficulty from pulling that bearing off, but as you can see, I don't believe that's the case. Okay, so it literally took me like 30 seconds or so to take that bearing cover off of there. After I split it, I just hit it in the corner where I couldn't reach once or twice with a sharp chisel, cut the metal right in half, took a couple pair of pliers, just bent it right around, and it came off pretty nasty mangled. So now we're gonna put the puller back on. We're gonna hook it back on here and see if we can pop that bearing. Well, the bearing broke and stuff went flying everywhere, as you can see, but the race is still on there and it went off with a bang. Puller's on the floor, ball bearings everywhere. We'll hook it up, see if we can get the inner race off. The puller did it. We got that little race off, the inner race of the bearing off, without much difficulty actually. And so we'll clean that up a little bit, put a little thin layer of grease on it there, right there, and we'll prepare to install the new one, which will probably be difficult. We did learn by looking under the truck that that's the forward piece. That's the forward piece we're working on here. So it looks like it goes on the shaft this direction, which gives us the ability to use a piece of pipe or something that's the right size on that inner race to tap that bearing home. Hopefully that will not be too big of a job. Okay, so that was a lot easier than I thought. I tapped it on just to get it started just the right way there, and I stood the whole thing up. I'll show you here a second. Watch the camera. I'm working by myself, so it's kind of difficult for all the camera angles. I stood the thing up on the floor and just kind of very gently lifted it and used it like a fence pounder, like this. And in about 4 taps, it literally was clear home. It wouldn't tap anymore. So that worked fantastic. And we'll double check the clearances here when we get it back up on the tailgate, and we're about ready to reinstall. All right, so we're ready to go back under the truck. As any good self-respecting mechanic would do, we check these U-joints here. They're actually still pretty stiff on the front half of the drive shaft there. We cleaned up the seal there where the seal goes into the back of the transfer case. We also noticed, if you look really close, I don't know if you can see it or not right there, on the splines there is a missing spline, so that it's indexed properly into the tail shaft there. But as you recall, we went ahead and marked that anyway, so that we know how to put this thing back together just the way it was from the factory. So stand by, we're gonna muscle this thing back under the truck and start putting her back together. Okay, so no trouble at all sliding the shaft back into the tail shaft there, and see our marks are all lined up. We came back here and we just raised, can't get a good angle, we raised that up and started the bolts, and I left them loose right now because they're slotted bolts, slotted in those brackets there. So I'm going to go ahead and fit up the rest of the drive line before I tighten those up, just to make sure everything's resting where it wants to be on the splines and so forth there. So again, 15 millimeter, no difficulty at all. Cleaned the threads up a little bit, and one person put that right back up in with no trouble. So we'll move on, and all we're going to do is reverse procedure. We're going to slide this, the rear half onto that spline, and then we're going to put the boot back on it there, and reinstall the bolts, obviously considering and paying attention to our index marks so everything's lined up back the way it was.